Iran's Gulf pressure campaign just backfired, catastrophically. For months, Tehran launched missiles at Saudi refineries, sent drones into Kuwaiti oil facilities, shut down the Strait of Hormuz, struck the one pipeline keeping Saudi crude flowing to the world. Every attack was designed to send a single message: the Gulf is ours, and anyone who challenges Iran will pay in fire. Saudi Arabia's response was not fear. It was not diplomacy. It was not a phone call to Washington. It was Pakistan. 8,000 combat troops, a full squadron of fighter jets, drone squadrons, a long-range air defense battery, all of it deployed to Saudi soil, operated by Pakistani personnel, financed by Saudi money, and pointed directly at Iran. The fighter jets are JF-17s, built jointly with China. The air defense system is the HQ-9, also Chinese. Iran's pressure campaign did not just summon a new military force into the Gulf. It quietly opened the door for Chinese-origin weapon systems to take up permanent residence inside the defense architecture of America's closest Arab ally. Nobody in Tehran planned for this. Nobody. Picture the eastern Saudi desert in early April. Dawn breaks over King Abdulaziz Air Base in Tehran, the sprawling military complex that sits less than 300 kilometers across the warm, oil-slicked waters of the Persian Gulf from the Iranian coast. On the tarmac, a sight that has never existed before in the history of Gulf security. Pakistani JF-17 Thunder fighters, compact, agile, combat-proven, lined up in the desert heat, their wings loaded, their cockpits manned by Pakistani pilots who crossed 2,000 kilometers of airspace to get here. Not on a training exercise, not on a goodwill tour, on a combat deployment. Beyond the flight line, the HQ-9 air defense battery, a long-range system capable of engaging targets at distances that put every Iranian aircraft within reach the moment it lifts off from bases across the Gulf. The launchers open toward the west like a steel umbrella, covering Saudi airspace from the one direction that matters. And beyond the launchers, 2 Pakistani drone squadrons, the silent sentinels of the deployment, low-cost eyes and claws that never stop watching the horizon and never need to sleep. Reuters confirmed the scale: about 8,000 troops, around 16 aircraft, mostly JF-17s, 2 drone squadrons, 1 Chinese HQ-9 system, 3 security officials and 2 government sources verified the deployment. And every piece of equipment on that base, every jet, every launcher, every drone, is being operated by Pakistani hands. Meaning Saudi Arabia did not just buy hardware, it imported an entire military operation. The crews, the doctrine, the chain of command, and the runway where the paperwork turned into steel is now the most heavily defended piece of real estate in the eastern Saudi desert. To understand how badly this backfired, you have to understand what Iran was trying to do, because on paper, Tehran's strategy was brilliant. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, warned that any attempt to restart war would face consequences that would be, in his words, more forceful and bitter. Forceful, bitter. Tehran believed it had the leverage to back up those words, and for a brief window, it looked like it did. Step 1. Strike Gulf energy infrastructure. On March 19th, Iranian aerial attacks hit a refinery inside Saudi Arabia, forced UAE gas facilities to shut down, started fires at 2 Kuwaiti refineries. 3 countries, 3 attacks, 1 message. The Gulf's wealth is vulnerable and Iran controls the lighter. Step 2. Close the choke point. The Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile corridor carrying a staggering share of the world's seaborne oil, was effectively shut. Global energy markets convulsed, prices spiked overnight, insurance premiums for tankers tripled, and Saudi Arabia, the world's largest crude exporter, was forced to reroute its entire oil export operation through a single artery, the East-West pipeline, running from the eastern oil fields to the Red Sea port at Yanbu. 7 million barrels per day, through one pipeline, one target. The entire economic output of the kingdom funneled through a tube in the desert, and Iran hit it. On April 8th, just hours after a ceasefire was agreed, Iran struck the East-West pipeline. The ink was not dry, the handshakes were still warm, and Tehran sent a missile into the one piece of infrastructure keeping Saudi oil flowing to the world. 7 million barrels a day, through one pipe. And Iran hit it while the ceasefire agreement was still being printed. This was not random escalation. This was a calculated architecture of fear. Strike the refineries to prove vulnerability, close the strait to eliminate alternatives, hit the last remaining pipeline to demonstrate that Saudi Arabia has nowhere to hide. Meaning Tehran wanted Gulf monarchies to feel naked, exposed, defenseless, and for a moment, they did. But that moment passed, and what replaced it was not the submission Iran expected. It was something far worse for Tehran, because 8 months before the first Iranian missile hit Saudi soil, Riyadh had already built its insurance policy, and Tehran either did not read it or did not believe it. September 17th, 2025. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. The language was not diplomatic, it was not vague, it was not open to interpretation. Any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. Attack on one equals attack on both. That is not a friendship treaty. That is a tripwire. And when Iran's missiles began landing on Saudi refineries, the tripwire activated. Within weeks of the March 19th attacks, Pakistani fighter aircraft began arriving in Saudi Arabia. By early April, the squadron was operational at King Abdulaziz Air Base. By mid-May, the full deployment was confirmed. 8,000 troops, 16 aircraft, drone squadrons, air defense. A combat-capable military package sitting on Saudi territory, facing Iran. This was not a token gesture. Before the pact expansion, Saudi Arabia hosted roughly 1,500 to 2,000 Pakistani personnel, advisors, trainers, the kind of quiet presence that does not make headlines. What arrived in April made headlines. This was a combat deployment. Fighter jets with loaded weapons, drone squadrons with strike capability, an air defense system that can reach targets deep into Iranian airspace. Pakistan did not send advisors. Pakistan sent a war-ready force. But here is the number that Tehran should read twice. 8,000 troops is what arrived. The pact allows for up to 80,000. 80,000. From an army of more than 600,000 active soldiers, one of the largest standing armies on the planet. What Saudi Arabia has on its soil right now is not the full deployment. It is the sample, the opening layer, the proof of concept. The pact can scale 10 times beyond what Iran sees today, and Tehran has no mechanism to stop a single additional soldier from arriving. And there is a shadow behind every one of those soldiers that Tehran cannot ignore, because Pakistan is the only nuclear-armed Muslim-majority nation on Earth. Nuclear weapons were not on the radar. Pakistan's defense minister said nuclear weapons were not on the radar of the pact. And that denial, that careful, deliberate denial, is precisely what makes the nuclear shadow so powerful. Nobody confirmed it, nobody denied it convincingly. The ambiguity is the deterrent. Reuters framed it directly. The pact puts Pakistan's nuclear umbrella into the Middle East security picture. Chatham House went further, saying the agreement signals Saudi Arabia's unease over whether America's informal security guarantees are robust enough. In other words, Riyadh looked at its options. It looked at Washington's commitments, it looked at the Iranian missiles landing on its refineries, and it decided that one superpower patron was not enough. It needed a second shield, one that speaks the same language, shares the same faith, and has 600,000 soldiers ready to deploy. And that is the part Tehran did not see coming, because Iran's pressure campaign did not isolate Saudi Arabia. It pushed Saudi Arabia into the arms of a country with more soldiers than Iran, more fighter jets than Iran, and a nuclear capability that Iran is still years away from matching. And this is where the story turns from bad for Tehran to structurally devastating. Because Iran did not just miscalculate the response, Iran miscalculated the logic of its own strategy. Tehran's playbook has always been built on one assumption: that Gulf monarchies are rich but militarily fragile, that they depend entirely on American protection, that if you hit them hard enough, fast enough, they will call Washington, and Washington will either intervene or hesitate, and either outcome benefits Iran. But the Saudi-Pakistan pact shattered that assumption from 3 directions at once. First, Saudi Arabia did not wait for Washington. It built its own defense layer. The deployment was not requested by the Pentagon. It was not coordinated through CENTCOM. It was a bilateral Saudi-Pakistani operation, financed by Riyadh, staffed by Islamabad, and independent of the American security umbrella. Second, Saudi Arabia did not just defend, it struck back. Reuters revealed that Saudi Arabia launched covert attacks on Iran while simultaneously pursuing de-escalation through diplomatic channels. Public peace, private war. The Gulf monarchies that Iran expected to cower were fighting on 2 fronts, military and diplomatic, simultaneously. Third, and this is the vicious cycle that Tehran cannot escape, every Iranian attack now strengthens the justification for Pakistani presence. Every missile that lands on Saudi soil is not just damage, it is a legal trigger. Any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. Every strike Iran launches tightens the pact. Every escalation brings more Pakistani boots to the desert. Iran built a pressure campaign designed to make Saudi Arabia feel alone. Instead, every act of pressure proves Saudi Arabia is not alone and pulls Pakistan deeper in. The cycle is simple, and it is irreversible. Iranian attack leads to pact activation, leads to Pakistani deployment expands, leads to Iran faces a wider deterrence web, leads to Iran escalates to compensate, leads to pact activates further. There is no exit, there is no reset button. There is no version of this equation where Iran comes out ahead. Because the harder Tehran pushes, the more the Gulf fills with forces that Tehran never planned to fight. So much for more forceful and bitter. And at this point, you might think the story is over. Iran miscalculated, Pakistan deployed, Saudi Arabia hardened, the defense pact works, case closed. It is not closed. Because there is a player in this story that has not fired a single shot, has not deployed a single soldier, has not issued a single statement about the Gulf crisis. And that player is quietly becoming the most important technological presence in the Middle Eastern defense map. That player is China. Look at the hardware sitting on Saudi soil right now. The JF-17 Thunder, Pakistan's primary export fighter, its combat-tested warhorse, is not a purely Pakistani aircraft. It is jointly manufactured with China. Mach 1.6, a service ceiling of 55,000 feet, 3,400 kilograms of weapons hanging from its hardpoints. This is not a ceremonial aircraft. This is a jet that Pakistan has already used in combat, already proven in contested airspace, and is now aggressively marketing across the developing world. The airframe, the avionics integration, the production line, all built through the Pakistan-China defense partnership that Reuters has documented extensively. Every JF-17 parked at King Abdulaziz Air Base carries Chinese engineering inside its fuselage. The HQ-9 air defense system, the steel umbrella over Saudi airspace, is Chinese. Not Pakistani, not American, not European. Chinese, designed in China, manufactured in China, and now sitting on Saudi soil. The soil of the United States' most important Arab security partner. Operated by Pakistani crews, financed by Saudi oil money, pointed at Iran. If you wrote this in a novel, your editor would tell you it was too implausible, meaning China did not need to deploy a single soldier to the Gulf. It did not need to sign a defense pact. It did not need to challenge America directly. Iran's pressure campaign did the work for Beijing. Because every Iranian missile that hit Saudi Arabia pushed Riyadh closer to a Pakistani shield. And that shield is built with Chinese technology. The Gulf defense map now contains Chinese origin hardware at its core, and Beijing did not have to ask permission. This is the hidden consequence that nobody in Tehran, and possibly nobody in Washington, fully anticipated. The deployment is Pakistani in uniform, it is Saudi in funding, but it is Chinese in technology. 3 countries, 3 interests, 1 deployment. And the country that benefits the most is the one that sent nothing. And now, the final layer that makes this entire story feel like a geopolitical novel that nobody would believe if it were fiction. As of May 23, 2026, while 8,000 Pakistani troops guard Saudi territory, Pakistan's army chief Asim Munir is sitting in Tehran mediating a possible deal between the United States and Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Read that again. Pakistan has troops inside Saudi Arabia protecting the kingdom from Iran. And Pakistan has its army chief inside Iran negotiating on behalf of the country its troops are deployed against. The same nation. Both sides of the table, simultaneously, a mediator with fighter jets in the war zone, a peacemaker with 8,000 soldiers guarding one side. This is not diplomacy. This is a geopolitical impossibility that is happening in real time. Saudi Arabia advocated de-escalation, self-restraint, and the reduction of tensions. De-escalation in the press conference, 8,000 troops on the ground, a covert strike campaign against Iran behind the curtain. And Pakistan, the country that is supposed to be the neutral mediator, already has its fighter jets pointed at Tehran from Saudi runways. Iran set out to dominate the Gulf through fear. It launched missiles at refineries. It closed the world's most important energy choke point. It struck the last pipeline keeping Saudi oil moving. Every attack was designed to make one statement: Iran controls this region. Instead, Iran summoned Pakistan, a nuclear-armed military power with 600,000 soldiers, directly into the Saudi defense architecture. Iran opened the door for Chinese weapons technology to take root in the heart of America's allied Gulf. And Iran created a vicious cycle where every future escalation only deepens the military presence Tehran wanted to prevent. Iran did not dominate the Gulf. Iran armed the Gulf against itself. Every missile Tehran fired added a brick to the wall that now surrounds it. The question now is not whether Iran can reverse this. It cannot. The troops are on the ground. The jets are on the tarmac. The pact is signed. The HQ-9 is operational. The question is whether Tehran understands, truly understands, that the next missile it fires will not just hit a refinery. It will trigger a defense pact with 80,000 soldiers behind it, Chinese air defense above it, and the shadow of a nuclear deterrent that nobody will confirm and nobody will deny. Iran tried to make Saudi Arabia feel alone in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia's answer was to make sure it never would be, ever again. So here is the question. Will Iran's pressure campaign force Tehran to the negotiating table before the Pakistani shield becomes permanent? Or has the Gulf already crossed the point of no return, where the troops, the jets, and the Chinese hardware never leave? Hit subscribe, because the next chapter of this story is already being written in two capitals, Riyadh and Tehran, and both of them are watching Pakistan.